We begin this story with a scene where we see several muscular men carrying a boy who is locked in a cage, preventing him from moving. This boy is our protagonist named Yukito, who is the son of the leader of this sect of muscular men. It turns out that these men are about to start a ritual called the Musubi Ritual, which involves throwing the chosen one, in this case our protagonist, into the sea, where he must survive in the depths of the ocean for 3 days. It is believed that the goddess Mitama, for whom this ritual is dedicated, will save the chosen one, and in this way, the chosen one will become the new leader of the sect. As the boy falls into the sea, we see him slowly sinking into the depths of the ocean, while his life's memories flash before his eyes. Before giving up, he asks the goddess Mitama to reincarnate him in a world without gods and without religion. After this, we see a pink-haired girl trying to awaken Yukito using a manual technique on the protagonist's lever. Due to this, he suddenly wakes up and the girl gets scared, leaving her work aside. Later, the girl takes the protagonist to the village, where she introduces herself as Anibro, a girl who works at the village's restaurant. After this introduction, Yukito tells Anibro that he is looking for the Adventurers Guild, to which she takes him to the farmland, where he meets 2 boys. The first one is Roy, a boy with strong convictions who starts off on the wrong foot with Yukito, because Roy claims that the women in the village belong to him and him alone. The second boy is named Clen, who is more relaxed and responsible, and he advises the protagonist to not pay much attention to Roy, as he can be stubborn. Shortly after, Clen gives Yukito his first job, which is to collect as many grapes as possible using a knife. This task is a piece of cake for the protagonist, as he quickly collects many grapes. However, Clen is not satisfied with his performance, thinking that Yukito has collected too many grapes that will go to waste over time. Yukito comes up with the idea of using the grapes to make an alcoholic beverage, which works out well. Now in the restaurant, we see the villagers enjoying this new drink and having fun. However, Yukito is not enjoying it with them. He is tired from all the work he has done this month. Among the villagers, there is a girl named Siluril, who is Elural's older sister, and both of them work at the village's restaurant. Days later, Yukito is working with Roy as usual when they witness a man running from something that is chasing him. Before they can react, a giant monster appears. Roy decides to act like a true man and confront the monster, but it's just a show to create an opportunity to escape. They end up hiding in a nearby cave. After this event, they all gather in the restaurant again to drink and have fun. The protagonist feels much better after being healed by Anibro. He now feels more free and unconstrained in this new world, so he starts celebrating. When Yukito gets tired of having fun, he decides to rest, and Anibro approaches him to thank him for making the villagers happy. She asks him to stay in the village forever. Yukito considers it and thanks God for reincarnating him in a peaceful world without rules. What Yukito doesn't know is that the world he's in now is the one he wished for when he asked the goddess Mitama. While walking, he comes across a lifeless animal, so he decides to bury it. However, in this world, there are no such customs, so he's unsure what to do. At that moment, Anibro and Roy appear, and Roy whispers something about a forbidden book that discusses intimacy to the protagonist. Moments later, the 3 of them are in the city going to an antique store to find this forbidden book. Once they reach the store, Yukito finds the book and opens it, realizing that it's not anything extraordinary. He even compares it to Renaissance art. They grab some other books of the same kind and leave the store. On the way back to the village, the protagonist witnesses a disturbing act as he sees some people taking their own lives under the orders of the higher authorities. This deeply affects him, as he fears this could happen to his new friends. However, they reassure him that the people in the village are treated differently from those in the city, ending the difficult conversation. In the evening, Yukito is gagged by Anibro, who wants to practice something from the forbidden book with him. Before doing so, she explains the situation of the villagers. They are marginalized people from the city who have a mark on their backs to distinguish them from city people, leading to different treatment. The protagonist frees himself from the poorly tied ropes and gifts Anibro his turquoise necklace that his father had given him in his previous life, believing it's not that important. Anibro is happy with this gesture before leaving. The next day, the protagonist is ready to start a new day of work, but he notices that there's no one around. He leaves the restaurant to find the others and comes across Roy lying on the ground seriously. Yukito asks what happened, and Roy confesses everything, revealing that Anibro and Siluril have been taken to be. Luckily, Clen appears with a carriage and asks the protagonist to join him to reach the girls as soon as possible. Changing scenes, we move to the city's entrance, where Anibro looks at her sister's lifeless body and feels fear, knowing she's next. Bertrand, the leader of the city's Annihilator troops, suddenly appears and orders his knights to Anibro, just as they did with Siluril. Fortunately, Yukito arrives just in time to save her from the knights' attacks. He manages to save her temporarily, but is eventually killed by Bertrand, who uses his sword to pierce him. Bertrand also decides to eliminate Anibro, who is killed in front of our protagonist. It appears to be the end for Yukito, but he begs the goddess Mitama to save him and his friends. He uses the turquoise necklace he had given Anibro the day before to make his plea. As a result, the necklace rises into the sky, causing the gloomy, rainy weather to change into a warm and pleasant one. From the sky, a girl with the appearance of a young child, who is none other than the goddess Mitama, descends. She lands on the ground and approaches Yukito, realizing that he is lifeless. In a capricious and manner, she decides to eliminate those who did this to him, including Bertrand and his knights. In the end, both the protagonist and the sisters are revived, and Mitama introduces herself to Yukito as his goddess. Once Mitama presents herself to the protagonist and his friends, they are momentarily bewildered as they don't understand how they could have returned to life. Back in the village, Yukito's friends, along with other villagers, reunite with their loved ones and collectively decide to hold a feast to celebrate their return to the village. After this celebration, we see Mitama meeting Alaral and Silaral, who want to help her change clothes. Alaral takes the opportunity to ask Mitama about her relationship with Yukito, to which Mitama responds that she is his goddess, and they will be together until separates them. This saddens Alaral, as she has feelings for the protagonist. At the same time, Yukito is surprised to learn that Yukito is attracted to girls with the appearance of a young child. However, Mitama's kind words change Alaral's attitude and encourage her to continue pursuing Yukito. A little later, Mitama and the girls meet the boys at the restaurant, and the goddess is by the protagonist's side as she doesn't want to be away from him. Roy, who has strong feelings for Mitama, observes her from a distance. Roy tries to flirt with Mitama, but she rejects him, humiliating him in front of everyone. Mitama then attempts to demonstrate her goddess powers to the protagonist, but can only manage to move a glass of wine, disappointing him as he expected her powers to be greater. It's explained that Mitama's power comes from the number of believers she has, and in this world without gods or religion, she has no power. As a result, Yukito decides to make the villagers believe in Mitama. They start with Roy, who they convince easily because, strangely, he's in love with Mitama. So for a couple of days, the three of them head to the town's center to demonstrate the miracles that the goddess Mitama can perform, but they end up embarrassing themselves on each occasion. After these events, Yukito doesn't know what else to do to make people believe in Mitama. He considers giving up, but just then, Alaral and Silaral appear carrying their pet Chilchil, who is seriously ill. Yukito suggests that the girls try to medicate Chilchil to help her recover. However, they explain that they don't have any medication because the city's authorities have a rule that non-human living beings should not be treated as such. So Yukito and Mitama set out to search for medicinal plants, eventually finding one and returning to prepare it for Chilchil. Although it seemed like Chilchil would improve at first, she ends up spitting out the medicine and stops breathing, marking the end of her life in this world. Yukito and the girls can't help but feel saddened. Mitama, using all her power from her soul believer, Roy, performs a miracle and revives Chilchil, bringing joy to the girls. This action increases her number of believers from 1 to 3. Because of this, Mitama begins to gain more power and recovers all the energy she spent to resurrect Chilchil. Afterward, she challenges Alaral to make another miracle request to demonstrate her power as a goddess. Everyone goes outside, and Alaral asks Mitama for her wish, which is to revive all the knights who were eliminated, including Bertrand. Although Yukito initially thinks it's a bad idea, he is eventually convinced by Silaral's words. With everything prepared and a decision made, Mitama uses her power to revive all the knights, successfully bringing each of them back to life. However, something went wrong as we see that Bertrand has been resurrected with a different appearance. He is now a woman. As a result, Bertrand runs away and heads to the forest because she doesn't want others to see her in the state she's in. Her peace doesn't last long as Roy finds her and tries to conquer her, but Yukito arrives just in time to prevent it from happening. The protagonist talks to her, and they come to an agreement as she feels grateful for being resurrected, and as a result decides to do what Yukito says. The next day, we see the monster attacking the farmland again where people were working. Mitama decides to use her magic to summon a sword for one of the workers to use, although this didn't help much as the sword broke very quickly. However, for the villagers' luck, Bertrand appears and, using her sword, manages to split the monster in half. This amazes all the people, which gives Yukito an idea. During the following days, with the help of Bertrand, Mitama, Alaral, and Silaral, Yukito manages to perform several miracles to make people believe. This way, Mitama's number of believers grows from 3 to 101, but it's still not enough for her to confront the entire army of the capital, which is the city. Changing scenes completely, you meet Atar, a girl who is part of the special forces of the capital, Arkanti. She has spent all this time defeating several monsters similar to the one Bertrand previously defeated. Returning to Yukito, he meets with Silaral and Clen to plan how to gain more believers, but they don't reach any conclusions. After Silaral drinks some alcohol, things get out of control, and they end up having a feast with all the people in the village to forget their problems. After this small party, the protagonist is tired and unmotivated because he still doesn't know what to do to gain more believers. Just then, Silaral arrives, and without saying much, she manages to inspire Yukito with a great idea, thanks to remembering the advice his father had given him in his previous life. As a result, a whole month passes, during which the people of the village are now more updated with their work and production, to the point where it no longer seems like a rural village. To make matters more interesting, all of this is observed by Atar, who, after defeating Bertrand and planning to take her to the capital, sees this in the village she thought was marginalized. Now we are shown a scene where the village is no longer a simple village but has become somewhat more modern. In this we see Yukito, along with Mitama and his friends and house, thinking about how to gain more believers, and it doesn't take long before we see Yukito put several of his ideas into motion. Firstly, Yukito decides to ask Mitama to obtain several pieces of advanced technology for the farmland so that the farm work becomes more efficient. Naturally, Mitama grants him this wish, causing several people to become believers of the goddess Mitama. Secondly, Yukito asks Mitama to provide all the villagers with water in their homes, which she manages to do, although she ends up exhausted afterward. Meanwhile, the people, including the protagonist and his friends, enjoy a refreshing afternoon at the village's pool. Lastly, Yukito asks Mitama to provide electric lighting for the entire village, which is well received by everyone, as they are seen gathered in the restaurant enjoying the lights while drinking and eating. Later at night, we see Yukito with Bertrand and Klen at the top of the forest, looking down at the village, amazed at what Mitama has accomplished. Mitama is lying exhausted behind them. Klen and Bertrand ask the protagonist about what a god is, as they are still curious about what kind of being Mitama is. Yukito explains that there are two types of gods. The first type are entities that serve to explain the inexplicable events that happen on Earth, and the second type are symbols of different religions that exist in the world. However, as there is nothing like that in this world, the explanation was somewhat in vain, but not entirely. However, after thinking it through, Bertrand comes to her senses and tells our guy that in this land there is a god, and that is none other than the Emperor. The next day, Mitama shows her believer count, which is 2,008 followers, meaning the entire village. Now Yukito needs to find more believers in other marginalized villages. However, before he can come up with a plan, Roy bursts into the house exclaiming that a girl has captured Bertrand. From Bertrand's point of view, she is tied to a tree and being interrogated by Atar. Atar asks her how they managed to improve the village, referring to the unexplained outbreak of futuristic machinery, clean water, and electricity. Bertrand tells her they accomplished all that on their own, but it doesn't convince Atar. She decides to call her superior. This is when we discover that her superior is named Loki, a woman with a lot of power. She orders Atar to destroy the entire village. So Atar, of course, starts the destruction of the village, but before that, she tries to take Bertrand's life by attempting to tear off her arm. Luckily for Bertrand, just at that moment, Mitama and Yukito arrive and save her. Mitama then prepares to fight to protect the village. We see the two girls start the battle, where initially it seemed like Mitama would win, as she used her powers to create monsters made of vegetables and herbs that managed to enclose Atar. But Atar didn't give up and used all of her power to break free and counterattack. The battle concludes with Mitama lying on the ground without energy, crying because she couldn't protect the village that Yukito cares so much about. Just at that moment, all of the protagonist's friends arrive. Once all are reunited with Mitama, Atar forms a massive energy ball that she launches towards the village, and it explodes, seemingly ending the lives of all the villagers. But not everything ends here, as it turns out this attack was softened thanks to Klen's powers, who made the attack an illusion. It is at this point that both the protagonist and Atar are surprised that Klen was able to do this, as he is just a simple human. However, he reveals his true identity, which is none other than Loki. Loki turns to Yukito and Mitama to ask for their help in defeating the famous Emperor. As these words were very strong for the protagonist, he is initially scared because he doesn't understand where Loki is going with this. At the same time, Atar tries to reason with Loki, but Loki ends up gagging her and silencing her. After this, she takes her to the capital, along with Yukito and Mitama. Now we find ourselves in the heart of the capital. Here, we finally meet the Emperor, who is a strong and imposing man, and he begins to talk briefly with Yukito. However, everything is interrupted when Mitama breaks an electrical device, which reveals the true form of the entire Imperial Palace. As a result, both Yukito and Atar learn that the Emperor is actually lifeless, and the figure they had been seeing was just an illusion of the Emperor who passed away thousands of years ago. All of this is explained by Loki, who tells them that her goal is to get rid of the Empire once and for all so that people can live freely. However, this comes at the cost of her and the other Archons becoming gods. Obviously, Atar is not pleased with this at all. Nevertheless, Yukito does not stand idly by because he doesn't want to grant Loki the satisfaction of having all the Archons become gods. So he attacks and neutralizes her and asks her for an explanation of what she plans to do with the world. Now we see a flashback of Loki remembering the past, where we see her on top of a building watching as the people of the capital take their own lives under the Emperor's order. This disgusts her, as she cannot believe that people are not free and are tied to a system that compels them to take their lives without being able to do anything about it. After investigating everything about gods, Loki decides to pose as Klen, a simple villager, noticing a difference between the people of the capital and the villagers. The former live their lives in a programmed manner, as if they were robots. while the villagers live in a freer and more relaxed way until their end, which unfortunately is not under their control but is still governed by the Emperor's system. Continuing with Loki's memories, she recalls everything that happened in the village until the arrival of Yukito, who spoke with strange terms and words that pique her curiosity. After spending a lot of time around him, she realized that the protagonist could help her summon the only real goddess up to that point, Mitama. After a couple of days of Mitama's arrival, Loki realized that Mitama recognized her despite her normal appearance. So after setting her plan in motion, she decided to stop pretending to be Klen, which brings us to the moment of the battle between Atar and Mitama, where Klen revealed her true identity to everyone. After this lengthy explanation, the protagonist realizes that Loki used him and Mitama to help her destroy the Imperial Palace and restore freedom to the people. However, this comes at the cost of Loki and the other Archons, who all have the same plan as Loki, becoming real gods. Although at first it may all seem crazy, Yukito decides to grant her wish and destroys the main artifact that gives life to the Imperial Palace. After being destroyed, a huge and beautiful tree sprouts. But this doesn't end here, as the protagonist tells Loki that she may become a goddess, but she can never equal the power of the only real goddess up to this point, Mitama. Following this event, we now see everyone gathered in the village restaurant. While the people and Yukito's friends are having fun and celebrating the downfall of the Emperor's system, he is solely focused on how to protect them from impending threats. At the same time, Loki is sitting at the same table with Atar. Yukito asks her why she is here, to which she responds that she is here to enjoy her last day with the people of the village. After this, Loki decides to leave the place, abandoning Atar completely. As night falls, Loki heads to the capital. Suddenly, she is intercepted by Bertrand, who is ready to fight her as he sees her as a threat to the people of the capital. An unexpected turn of events occurs when Loki uses her powers to deceive Bertrand into believing that he has turned into a man again. Bertrand is initially pleased, but then realizes that it was all just an illusion by Loki. Before proceeding with their fight, he decides to accompany her to the capital, which Loki accepts without resistance. Returning to Yukito, he is left in charge of taking care of Atar, who has been without energy and hasn't moved a finger all day. However, when Yukito approaches her, Atar begins to shout at him, saying that thanks to him, her life no longer has any meaning. She sheds some tears that make Yukito feel sorry for her, prompting him to help. To make her even happier, the protagonist feeds her some ice cream, which is observed by Anibro, who can't help but think that Yukito likes girls who appear to be young. The next day, Yukito gathers the people of the village to explain that they will now have two goddesses, Mitama and Azar. At first, this upsets Mitama because her number of believers has decreased as half of them have turned to Azar. This is all part of Yukito's plan. He intends to continue gathering more and more believers from other marginalized villages, and it seems to be working well thanks to the grand achievements of Mitama and Azar. A little later, Yukito and his friends are gathered in the restaurant, celebrating the fact that they have gained a significant number of new believers. In the midst of enjoying some meals, Yukito tells the others that they need to find Bertrand since it's strange that he has disappeared. But then Siluriel enters the scene and informs the protagonist about something she has been investigating regarding a mysterious goddess. Siluriel has information that a goddess named Dakini has been gaining many followers. This is counterproductive to Yukito's plan, and he asks Atar if she knows anything about this mysterious goddess. She replies that all she knows is that this goddess Dakini is the goddess of love, and with so many believers, she has more power than both Mitama and herself combined. Armed with this information, Yukito takes it upon himself to educate his friends about intimate relationships with the aim of preventing Dakini from leading them into the temptation of love. At nightfall, they all head to the religious group of Dakini. Upon reaching the place, they are greeted by Rish, the subdirector of the House of Love of the goddess Dakini. She guides them to the main room, where the goddess Dakini herself would be. While walking towards the room, several girls compliment Rish, saying that she's a very powerful woman when she wears her glasses, able to satisfy anyone just by looking into their eyes. Upon arriving in the room where Dakini is supposed to be, Rish forces them to separate as they can only enter as couples. Mitama separates from the protagonist to go with Roy to the next room, while Yukito stays with Alirol. After a few seconds, the famous Dakini appears on the scene. First, she greets the protagonist and Alirol, and after Yukito tells her that both he and Alirol want to become her believers, Dakini takes a picture of them both and then leaves. At that moment, both he and Alirol feel a strong attraction toward each other and become very affectionate. This causes concern for Yukito as he realizes that this is due to the great power of Dakini. Nonetheless, the protagonist manages to overcome his impulses and distances himself from Alirol. At that moment, the wall of the room is destroyed because the same thing happened to Mitama and Roy. She had no other choice but to throw him against the wall with all her strength. In the next scene, Dakini meets with Rich to instruct her to take care of the new believers. Rich goes to the room where the protagonist is, and upon entering, she sees Mitama fixing the wall using her powers. Yukito tries to prevent her from revealing what she has seen. Fortunately for the protagonist, he manages to take Rish's glasses off, rendering her powerless, and starts flirting with her, making her give in to his advances. Afterward, they bind Rish as they will not release her until she does what they say. During a conversation the protagonist has with Mitama, Rish tells them that she wants to help because she never really wanted to be part of Dakini's religious group. Changing scenes completely, we now see Loki and Bertrand observing the citizens of the capital from a distance. Bertrand believes that nothing has changed, but Loki makes her open her eyes to see the harsh reality. Due to the Emperor's regime coming to an end, the citizens are not capable of being free. They were used to following orders, and now they are unable to be productive members of society. Returning to the protagonist's situation, we see that Rich explained her entire situation and the reason she decided to help sabotage Dakini. She was forced to become a believer when Dakini invaded her village and converted everyone into believers. She had no choice but to pretend to be a believer to avoid further problems. We also learn that Rishi shares the same interests as Alarol. They both like to read forbidden books that discuss intimacy, which quickly makes them close friends. Back with Yukito, he's unsure whether to accept Rish's help as he doesn't fully trust her. Nonetheless, he ends up accepting because he doesn't have many other options. Rish disguises Yukito, Alarol, and Mitama to make them appear as Dakini believers and then presents them to the other believers to ensure the plan's success. Shortly after, we see Mitama collapsing due to a lack of energy, and she shows her believer count, which has surprisingly dropped to 3. She wonders why this is happening. On the other hand, we start to see the answer to this question. Atar is taking all of Mitama's believers because she is helping the village people. Yukito explains that when a god abandons their people, their faithful believers lose faith in them. After Yukito speaks some kind words to her, she rises happily and with great energy. She uses her powers to summon various objects and toys. Now we turn to Dakini, who was observing her believers making love. While doing so, she overhears 4 male believers talking about different adult objects they found, which surprises Dakini. She had never seen things like those before. She asks them where they got those items, to which they respond that they are in the rooms of the headquarters. As a result, Dakini heads to find who is possibly the main responsible person, which is Rish. When she finds Rish, the latter asks for an explanation. Rish says she is merely helping the believers better understand the concepts of love. Dakini initially doubts this, but she soon realizes that Rish has been doing this to steal her believers. Lately, she's been losing her power, which is why she accuses Rish of being a traitor. For this reason, Dakini orders her who are like her bodyguards to capture the group responsible, which she deduces to be the protagonist's group. They were the last to arrive at the location, and problems started occurring after their arrival. Among the purgers, Roy, who seems to be the leader, uses his authority and repeatedly strikes Yukito. Later, on the outskirts of Dakini's House of Love, the 4 of them are imprisoned in the open air, with only their heads sticking out. They are about to be judged by Dakini. She first turns her anger toward Rish, whom she considered her right-hand woman, but who has now become a traitor. As Rish doesn't offer any explanation, Dakini forces her to speak with the help of the Rish starts crying inconsolably in front of all the other believers, begging for Dakini's forgiveness. She says she only wanted to help others and never intended to take Dakini's place. This makes Dakini's believers feel sorry for Rish, causing Dakini to hesitate in making a decision. The creation of this dilemma was all thanks to Yukito's plan. He had the brilliant idea of teaching Rish how to act, considering her a good liar. He managed to make her cry so inconsolably that her believers felt pity for her. Thus, Dakini decides to forgive Rish and her group. However, we later see them transferred to a dungeon. Now we are told Dakini's life story. The Emperor orders her to suppress people's desires for love and experiences, as he plans to make the people of the capital not reproduce but rather be created artificially. Naturally, Dakini is unhappy with this since her specialty is precisely to help people be free to love and follow their instincts. But she has no choice but to follow the Emperor's orders. Although she initially succeeds in her task, after a few days, she finds out that people can still reproduce. As a result, she ends up being fired since she couldn't fulfill her job. Just when everything seemed lost, she finds a small girl named Toka under a bridge who is reading a book. After taking a closer look at the book, Dakini realizes that this girl is just like her. Toka and Dakini become very close, sharing many pleasant moments. However, everything ends when Toka is suddenly taken, along with others, to a marginalized village far from the capital. Dakini says her goodbyes from a distance. Time passes and Dakini tries to reunite with Toka, but comes across a terrible scene. She finds the now adult Toka. It's explained that Toka had a romantic relationship with a man, which resulted in her becoming pregnant. When people found out, they decided to take her life because they didn't know how to deal with the situation. Here, Dakini promises Toka that she will do her best to make people capable of love and following their instincts in the future. Returning to the dungeon where Yukito and his friends are, they are about to be attacked by the... Luckily, Atar and Siluriel arrive to rescue them. After Atar defeats all the entire group escapes from the dungeon. While escaping, Mitama realizes that Atar has more believers than she does. Initially, she becomes very upset, but she later understands why her believers stopped believing in her. Yukito explains that the people in the village noticed her absence, which forced them to believe in Azar. Yukito always believed that Atar had more strength and power than Mitama. Once they exit the dungeon, the group reunites with Dakini. However, she attacks them when she notices that Rich has a book that belonged to her late friend Toka. Fortunately, Atar defends Rish and retaliates, forcing Rish and Mitama to escape. Then Dakini talks to Azar and manages to anger her with harsh words. In response, Azar destroys her phone, causing Dakini to transform and reveal her true goddess form. She shows she has over 15,000 believers. On Mitama and Rish's side, Rish tells Mitama that Yukito asked them to leave to continue the other part of the plan, which relies entirely on Mitama. This makes Mitama happy, and she regains energy knowing that the protagonist believes in her. On Yukito's side and the other girls, all of them are eventually hypnotized by Dakini's immense power of love. The girls come close to the protagonist, leaving him with no escape. Fortunately, Mitama saves him, breaking the girl's hypnosis. From a distance, Rish tells Dakini that she plans to start a new religious sect where Mitama will be the goddess. This causes some of Dakini's believers to switch to Mitama's side. Dakini isn't too worried because she still has many more believers than Mitama and Atar combined. However, she suddenly realizes that her powers aren't working. Mitama explains that this is happening because the true goddess Dakini from another astral plane is superior to her. The Dakini on Earth only borrowed her powers, which aren't enough to face the true Dakini. Later, it is revealed that Mitama knelt and asked the real goddess Dakini to stop the powers of the Earth's Dakini for a while. They both continue to fight, but it ends poorly for Dakini since she can't do much due to her lack of power. She decides to flee, but as she does so, she is captured by Roy, who begins hugging her to keep her from escaping, as part of Yukito's plan. Thanks to this, Azar manages to defeat her without much trouble. She is seen defeated on the ground, but still refusing to admit defeat, promising to return to wage war because she wants to restore the world to its previous state. Suddenly, Rish appears, and after having an emotional conversation with Dakini, she reveals that she is Toka's daughter. This makes Dakini emotional and she says, "I love you" to Rish, imagining that she is Toka. Following this, we see Dakini locked in the dungeon because the protagonist and his friends don't intend to let her out until she cooperates with them. They ask her to talk to her believers so that from now on, they become believers of Mitama instead of her, to which she obviously refuses. Due to this, Yukito comes up with a plan to use Rish to play with Dakini's feelings. Since Rish is Toka's daughter, Dakini won't be able to refuse her anything. After a great performance by the protagonist and Rish, they manage to make Dakini share followers with Rish's sect, which has Mitama as the goddess. As a result, Mitama now has more believers than before. Afterward, the group of friends heads to the village, and while crossing the fields, they encounter several monsters, which Azar and Mitama defeat. Upon arriving in the village, they find that it has been ravaged by these monsters, and the people are missing. After a moment, the villagers appear. They were hiding in a secret bunker as advised by Siluril in case of trouble. Since everything is destroyed, Yukito asks Mitama to use her powers to rebuild the village, but she refuses because she doesn't want to feel exhausted again. However, after being motivated by the villagers, she ends up using her tremendous power and manages to fully restore the village. Following this, everyone begins to celebrate at the restaurant. Suddenly, a villager rushes into the restaurant to inform the protagonist that Roy is in trouble. The monsters have reappeared, and this time they have cornered Roy. Upon reaching the boy, Azar defeats all the monsters. They discover that Roy is holding a small, wounded girl. He attempts to heal her using his methods, but she ends up hitting him. The protagonist sends Azar to approach the girl, and she passionately kisses him, revitalizing him. She explains to everyone who she is and her situation. This little girl is Gaia, one of the main archons, who has the power to create and manipulate monsters. However, because she lacks believers, she cannot control her powers, leading her monsters to destroy Yukito's village and even attack her. For this reason, Gaia asks the protagonist for help. Initially, he isn't inclined to assist her since he has no reason to. But after hearing that she also wants to defeat Loki, he decides to help her. The next day, the entire group heads to the Imperial Palace in the capital. Upon arriving at the entrance, Gaia shows Yukito that they can't proceed further because the place is heavily secured both above and on the surface. Surprisingly, a mysterious guardian appears to confront the protagonist and his friends, but they realize that she is none other than Bertrand. She surrenders and decides to return with them. Before everyone can return to the village, Loki appears to taunt them for a while. As Mitama refuses to remain idle, she tells Loki that she can defeat her because she has many believers. However, Loki reveals that she has even more followers, nearly 1.5 million believers. This leaves everyone except Yukito stunned, who tells her he expected more from her. After these words, the group leaves, leaving Loki shocked by Yukito's narcissistic attitude. Back at the village's restaurant, Bertrand prepares to explain to everyone that Loki is now the new empress of the capital. This is the reason why she has that many believers, because all the people in the capital still believe in the emperor and his regime. This sparks an idea in the protagonist's mind because he notices the mistake Loki just made by becoming the new empress. It turns out that Loki's believers aren't really believers in her. They are believers in the emperor. So Yukito decides to implement his new plan, which consists of creating a band with his friends to play in front of the people of the village. Unfortunately for Yukito, he had forgotten that certain things do not exist in this world, including music. So without wasting much time, he decides to teach his friends everything about music. In this way, we see everyone playing various instruments while others sing. However, Bertrand doesn't do well, as she isn't suited for this. Days pass, and the protagonist's band performs at various concerts they set up themselves, all in adoration of Mitama. On Mitama's side, she remains gagged because Yukito doesn't want her to be part of the concert. Nonetheless, she manages to free herself as her power has increased. Thinking her number of believers has also increased, she checks, but she's surprised to find that she still has the same number of believers as before, so she doesn't understand the source of the newfound power. It's here that we learn that music is transcendental, moving people's feelings and staying in their memories. The power that Mitama received comes from the music of the protagonist's band. Changing scenes, we now join Bertrand, who is in the restaurant receiving a scolding from Yukito because she can't do anything right. This leaves Bertrand to cry and beg the protagonist to let her stay with them, offering to do whatever he asks in return. She begins to develop feelings for him but puts them aside when he assigns her a task. Moving on to the next day, we see what task Yukito assigned to Bertrand, which is to keep an eye on Gaia because he doesn't trust her. We learn that Gaia travels from town to town to recruit children and turn them into her believers. Since they are only children, she can easily manipulate them, making them believe she is their mother. She managed to do this with a couple of children whom she keeps captive in a small cabin, far from the towns. As expected, Bertrand reports this to Yukito, who congratulates her and hugs her again, making her feel nervous once more. The following day, the protagonist planned to meet with Teini, but before she arrives, Bertrand appears and flirts with him. At first, Yukito finds this strange, but he realizes it's Teini using her love powers on Bertrand and asks her to stop. Once Bertrand is no longer under Teini's spell, she notices she is dead and rushes out of the place. Now with Teini and Yukito reunited, he asks for her help to rescue the children from Gaia. Initially, she refuses, but later accepts because Rish requested it. In the following days, Teini meets the captive children in the cabin and becomes friends with some of them. As the work becomes exhausting for her, later at the restaurant, she tells Yukito that she doesn't want to help anymore. But that's when the protagonist uses a psychological trick to get her help again, blackmailing her by invoking the memory of Toka. She agrees to help save the children but mentions it's for the children's sake, not his. The fun ends when two slightly older children appear who were the only ones not to approach Teini, initially because they follow all the orders imposed by Gaia. Teini is surprised and can't believe what Gaia did to these children. She tries to approach them to convince them to have fun with her and not think about obeying orders, but at that moment, several monsters emerge from the water, surrounding Teini, the children, and herself. These monsters chase Teini and the children for quite a while. During this, we're shown a flashback of the past of the two children who summoned the monsters. The children are named Kai and Cyan and were first shown Cyan's past. It turns out that Cyan had a perfectly normal life. She was handed over to some people by the Emperor, who became her parents, and she had a good time with them. However, on an ordinary day, the Emperor's knights burst into their home to take her father away since it was his time to end his life. Cyan tried to defend her father, which made him angry, and he decided to send her to an isolation camp due to her misbehavior. On the carriage ride to the camp, Chaya meets Kai for the first time, who seems to have been through something similar. They quickly get along. Surprisingly, the carriage is attacked by a monster, which after knocking it over, starts taking the lives of everyone on board, leaving only Kai and Cyan alive. These children met Gaia, who rescued them from the monster she created herself, establishing a bond of trust and safety between them and Gaia. Returning to the present, we see that Kai and Cyan are still pursuing Teini and the other children. Suddenly, they are surprised to see that the monster they summon is defeated by a mysterious girl, who we know as Azar. But at that moment, Gaia appears behind them and using all her power, creates a giant monster that separates Kai and Cyan from Yukito. In this way, the children reunite with Gaia, who hugs them, relieved that they followed all her orders. But then she discards them like trash, tossing them into the river and letting the monster devour them while they cry and ask for her help. After this, Yukito and his friends attempt to defeat this monster, but they can't harm it in any way, so they decide to run. Fortunately, Aliril and Siliril arrive in a van to pick them up. This allows them to escape the monster. We find out that the monster is called Typhon, the largest monster Gaia can create using her powers. To everyone's surprise, especially Yukito's, this explanation comes from Yoshi, one of the children Teini managed to rescue, who is the most intelligent of the remaining two children. While the group continues their journey, Typhon emerges entirely from the ground, revealing his full body. This causes instability in the ground and the van loses control, leading to two of the children flying into the air. Yukito manages to catch them and put them back in the van, but now he's the one sent flying through the air. Typhon takes this opportunity to impale him with one of its tentacles. All of this is witnessed by the rest of the group, leaving them horrified. They quickly leave the scene, as they don't want to end up like Yukito and Mitama. Once the group arrives in the village, they head to the restaurant to think of a solution, as without Yukito and Mitama, the whole town could disappear quickly. Here, Alirol, using the power of faith, decides to stay positive and starts believing that Yukito and Mitama are alive. This positive energy causes the turquoise necklace that the protagonist gave her when they first met to shine, and a deformed copy of Mitama emerges from her. This ugly Mitama begins writing an encrypted message on the ground, which no one understands except Yoshi, who deciphers it. The message reveals that Yukito, Mitama, Kai, and Cyan are safe and inside Typhon. Thanks to this, everyone begins to devise a plan to rescue their friends. On the protagonist's side, he, Kai, Cyan, and Mitama are inside Typhon, along with Gaia. Gaia can't believe that Yukito survived everything she put him through, as it seems like he keeps coming back to life, which indeed is the case because Mitama makes it possible. Then the protagonist asks Gaia where she's heading, and she tells him she's going to the capital to destroy everything. With Typhon's help, it'll be a piece of cake. Yukito tells her he won't allow her to accomplish this. This leads to an argument between them, summarized in them both being equally bad people, as they both began by lying to people to gain their trust and then using and betraying them. The protagonist doesn't want to accept this low blow, as he knows what kind of person he is. He did what he did to save the town, and despite lying and using people, he allowed himself to feel different emotions and be himself. Amid these emotional words, Gaia refuses to listen any longer and prepares to end his life. Just when everything seemed lost for the protagonist, we can see the musical band of his friends gathering in the village to play a concert. They hope to help Yukito and Mitama from a distance since they know the power of music. As a result of this, we see that initially, Atar manages to gain more power than the others because she has more believers than the other goddesses. Without wasting time, she hands her guitar to Bertrand and leaves the scene to attack Typhon. Following this, the Kini is the next to gain power, all thanks to the love Rich gave her. It seems like the boys' musical band is about to defeat the monster since they are inflicting a lot of damage on it. However, everything takes a 180-degree turn when Typhon unleashes a fierce attack that destroys the entire stage. Nevertheless, the boys want to continue helping and decide to keep playing their instruments. But before they can do that, Mitama uses her powers and manages to trap the monster as she has regained some energy. And she proposes to the protagonist that if he becomes her believer, she can gain the strength to defeat Gaia and Typhon. The boy agrees without a second thought to become her believer for the first time in the whole story. Mitama gains a lot of power and frees the boy by summoning a sword that cuts the chains that held him captive. However, after he's freed, he goes back on his words, telling Mitama he doesn't remember saying anything about being her believer, which infuriates her as he has deceived her once again. Once Yukito is released, he decides to confront Gaia. This fight lasts quite a while as neither emerges as the victor. The protagonist keeps regenerating every second, making it impossible for Gaia to finish him off. Consequently, Yoshi has a feeling that things are not going well inside Typhon. Recalling what the protagonist told him in the van earlier, he instructs the entire band that it's time to move on to phase 2 of the plan. This phase involves Atar acting and emotionally blackmailing her believers to convert them into believers of Mitama. After shedding some tears in front of her audience, she succeeds in converting all her believers to become part of Mitama, giving her the strength to break free from Typhon's body. Mitama takes advantage of this moment to attack and pierces her chest, finally defeating Gaia. Shortly after this, we see that Yukito is badly, so Mitama goes to his rescue, heals him, and takes him to a safer place. On the other hand, we see Yukito's friends looking for him. Once they find him, they embrace him and are relieved to see that he is safe. As for Gaia, she's lying on the ground, defeated, and accepts this fact. Nearby are all the children she considered her own. She tells them that if they want to end her, they should do it because she has nothing left to lose. This prompts Kai to step forward and approach her with a knife, ready to finish her off. However, before he could harm her, Cyan intervenes in her hand as she grabs the blade. Despite everything Gaia has done, Cyan approaches her, forgives her, and hugs her, saying she wants to start a family from scratch, this time without lies, only showing love. Later, we see the entire town's people enjoying what remains of the concert. Among the audience are Gaia and the children. They were all taken in by Yukito's orders, who also placed Kai in charge of keeping an eye on Gaia, as he doesn't fully trust her. Kai reveals that he didn't follow Gaia as her believer. Instead, he was following her to be close to Cyan, as he is in love with her. Moments later, while Gaia and Mitama playfully pull each other's hair, Yukito realizes something strange in Mitama's believer count. It shouldn't reach 30,000 mathematically, even if you combine all the believers of Atar, Rish, and Dakini. This is when Loki appears and confesses to the protagonist that she lent some of her believers to Mitama to help her get rid of Gaia and prevent a tragedy in the capital. Yukito reflects on all these experiences, recalling both the beautiful moments and the tragic ones while sitting by the river. Suddenly, he's found by Alirol and Silirol, who become emotional after hearing the kind words he says to them. Shortly afterward, the rest of his friends arrive. They'd all celebrate the successful outcome and the fact that Yukito changed their lives forever with his presence. Before concluding this story, the protagonist says that regardless of the cost, whether or not he has a god on his side, He will always protect the town and his friends. He values these adventures more than anything in the world.